Welcome to the Her Story Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Diversity Connector. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating young woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin and I'm from around Melbourne, Victoria in Australia. And yeah, I guess the base of my story is around disability and youth and disability. So, but I guess also what led me to disability led me to social work as well, which is the career I've jumped into. So to start from the beginning, I guess growing up, my dad was very into science and raised me with that. My mother's a psychologist, so I've always been surrounded by science. So in high school, I did psychology, and I've now done a Bachelor of Psychology and just finished my Master of Social Work last year. So that's been my education journey overall. In terms of disability, when I was, I want to say 15, I started getting a bit of pins and needles. And as my mother had had a very similar case of sciatica, which is like nerve pain, and had to have spine surgery, it was a red flag. So I was taken to doctors and specialists very quickly. And after an MRI, it was found one of my vertebrae had slipped. So it was compressing on nerves in my spine. So essentially physio, everything else wasn't going to work. Surgeon said, mechanical issue, going to have to do surgery. So at 17, I had a spinal fusion for my L5-S1 vertebrae to be fused together. Unfortunately, that didn't, it stopped it getting worse, and it was getting progressively worse in terms of damage, but the pain had not changed. So when I was 18, was 17 to 18, several drugs, several remedies were tried, nothing was effective. So at 18, I had a nerve stimulator implant put in, which essentially sends out electrical pulses and blocks the painful nerve signals or covers them, depending on the implant you have, like with different sensations. I recently had mine replaced because they last up to 10 years. Mine lasted for about 5. So I have a new implant now, and I'm still in towards the end of recovery. Unfortunately, I've been very, very lucky and blessed in terms of medical help. With my mother being in the health sector, she's been able to advocate for me, and because of my history, doctors were more likely to believe me, but many are not so lucky. And we also have private health, which is a godsend. But I know from talking to other people with disability and chronic pain, It's not always that simple. On Medicare, it can take years to get the help that I've had much faster. Also, without a history, if some people can just get nerve pain out of nowhere with no history, and it can be dismissed. One type of pain that's really dismissed is endometriosis for women. So I am very blessed in the help I've received. So it's made me all the more passionate to move towards disability advocacy. Initially, so for my master's placements, I had to kind of have an idea of where I wanted to be placed in terms of my long-term career. And initially, I was against doing anything disability. And I realized it's because I had some internalized, the words escape me now, but some negative ideas or limited ideas about what disability work is. And I was able to challenge those ideas and have since grown to really enjoy disability work. My final placement last year was with Youth Disability Advocacy Service, and I absolutely loved it. So I worked with people aged 12 to 24 who were having barriers into education, employment, were generally the primary ones because of the age area, but it could have been NDIS as well. And yeah, it's just heartbreaking to see, once you're exposed to so many different types of disability in that sector, you end up seeing everywhere how ableist our society is, and it's not really talked about in the same way as other issues with discrimination. So I am very keen to promote the discussion of ableism. And ableism does intersect, it's not ableism on its own. It intersects as well with gender, with sex, with race, with sexuality, and making it all the more intense. So it's a discussion for everyone. And the intersections are important because when someone has intersections, so for example, if they were transgender and disabled, you don't just have those factors of transgender and disabled. The intersection of those two is a whole new type of experience. And those intersections need to be addressed across the board. So I've become, really passionate about advocating for this because as a disabled person, I do have some privilege that other disabled people don't, as I mentioned before. However, in saying that, I have experienced my fair share of barriers. When I started my journey for my bachelor's at Monash University, and I'm hopeful that it has changed now. But at the time in 2018 to 2020, I was living on Clayton campus, and all the people who needed exam adjustments had to go to the Caulfield campus. Now, the only adjustment I needed was to have a soft office chair instead of the plastic ones they typically have, which you can get from anywhere. And they were like, "Nah, can't be done. You have to go to Caulfield," which makes no sense because that's not an adjustment. That would make it harder for me. Luckily, my mother was able to advocate just by looking up disability law, and they quickly backtracked, but I had to fight that every year. And eventually I got sick of it and I moved to Deakin partway. And Deakin's been incredible, extremely supportive. I highly recommend them for people with disability and diversity in general. Also, as a recent graduate from my master's, unfortunately, I've applied for, I don't know, it must be 60 jobs more, and I've been repeatedly knocked back because of the intersection of being a new graduate without much prior experience besides my placement and having disability adjustments. I've been looking for 4 days a week hybrid work or remote work, but unfortunately the social work industry especially is not well set up for hybrid work. Even though my placements have shown that it can be done, a lot of people are still quite behind in terms of hybrid work. And after COVID, it improved, but a lot of businesses have been trying to bring it back to on-site and removing hybrid. So that's been disappointing. So yeah, there is significant barriers to, especially intersection of youth and disability. And I'm hoping once I can secure some work, but also in the meantime, advocate for better adjustments for people with disability.
It's quite a journey that you've been on, Caitlin. And it's also interesting to see that you've taken what has been your experience and you're now helping other people who've gone through similar experiences to find a better way to cope and to get assistance. So can you share an impactful experience from your final placement with YDAS, where you helped a disabled young person overcome human rights infringements?
Sure. I guess the first one that springs to mind was a young man I worked with who had intellectual disability and autism, and his mother also had autism. She was a single mother, and he was in his I think year 11, and the school was being extremely difficult in terms of providing necessary adjustments, even though in his plans, his like IEPs and that sort of thing, it was very clear what he needed. The school was still not providing those appropriately. And there was a lot of power dynamic between the school and the mother. So the mother would go in to meet with them to advocate for her son, but it'd be her against like 5 teachers, which is just not okay. And she would just fall apart because she basically, she had no power in the situation. So when we came in as just sadly, sometimes if you come in just with the title of advocate, it gets people in line, which is a good thing, but it's sad that it has to come to that. And luckily, we were able to advocate for them. This young man had also experienced a traumatic event at his work experience that had not been addressed well. And while trying to, progress some action about this, we devised a plan because he found it extremely traumatic to retell his story. And trauma can be a big part of disability as well. And we suggested he write down his story once and that's it. And then he doesn't have to retell it. And then repeatedly organizations would ask about speaking to him. And I said, actually, this is his story. You read this first, and then if you have further questions, talk to him. And that saved him a lot of times of repeating that trauma.
Yeah, that would be extremely challenging for a young person who's already traumatized, having to retell the story. So how do you integrate your mental health and social work skills to empower disabled young people to access essential services?
I guess it's about informed decision making or supported decision making. So ideally, as advocates, what we wanted to do was, so I guess I should backtrack, sorry. Disabled people often are not encouraged to make their own decisions. Often decisions are made for them. Even people with intellectual disability, there's an assumption that they cannot make their own decisions, and it's completely false. Even people who are nonverbal can usually give some indication of their will and preference. So
Right.
it's just about putting that effort in to make that happen. And it is a skill, making decisions, that most of us grow up naturally learning that some disabled people don't. So we'll, sometimes people come to us and want us to make decisions, and we'll go, actually, what are some things you might want to do? Or if they're not sure, we'll go, well, these are some possible options. Let's discuss them, see what might work best for you. So it's about not being the worker as making decisions for the client. It's working together on an even playing field as much as possible. And that seems to really foster that independence that can lead to disabled people really being able to advocate for themselves. And that's part of the actually our reviews at WIDAS. Some of it reviewing plans was, what advocacy skills have you developed with the client? So that's a key thing, is trying to support them to be independent in their advocacy as well.
Okay. Wow. How has your personal experience with a physical disability influenced your professional path and advocacy efforts?
So yeah, for my disability, I guess just across the board, it gives me more of a genuine empathy for people experiencing barriers compared to someone who's lived an entirely privileged life.
Yeah.
So even people who are like refugees or different gender spectrum, having that empathy of experiencing barriers personally can just give you a bit more of that genuine empathy, compared to just learning the theory and the, everything you learn at university. It gives you that unique perspective and a genuineness that can't be taught. And it helps, not, you don't have to be, but for me, I'm very open about my disability. Of course, you have to be careful in terms of, it's called disclosure, that it's not going to, it has to be to benefit the client. It can't be like a trauma dumping sort of thing. So you have to be careful how you use it. But yeah, I think without even saying it, I can show that empathy.
That's good. So what are some of the major challenges that you've encountered in advocating for the rights and inclusion of disabled people in society, and how have you addressed these challenges?
Yeah, it's tough because it's, in terms of like cultural and structural levels, it's through everything. Ableism, unfortunately, but I guess when working, for personally, I've done a couple articles now. I did one recently, with Youth Affairs Council, I think it was. So just being visible helps, putting stories out there, discussing the issues. In terms of at WIDAS, you work within the system, I guess, to challenge it. And we were taught this at university as well. You just do your best to challenge the system from the inside, because can't fix everything, unfortunately. And that's from an individual advocate perspective. There's also structural advocates who look at the policies, the laws, and they try to advocate and change from that end, which is extremely important. But from the individual side, I think every disabled person you help to be able to advocate for themselves is a step in the right direction.
That's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about advancements in disability rights and inclusion. Based on your experience, what advancements have you observed in disability rights and inclusion in recent years?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I think in a lot of ways, obviously it varies, but I think COVID was a little bit of a blessing in disguise in some ways, in terms of hybrid and remote work becoming so much more common. It was proven that it's possible. Before then, it was totally dismissed as this isn't possible. It's also not only for people in employment, but I've got a parent who's in the education department, and she has seen young children with trauma or disability who previously refused, or school refusal, I think, is the technical term, but I don't agree with it. Kids who were not capable, who were not supported to go to school, they were actually attending. They had full attendance because of hybrid and remote work. So it can really, I think I cannot understate the value of hybrid and remote opportunity. And unfortunately, in even social work, I had a comment recently about, oh, well, you know, for new grads, you really need to be on site, which just isn't true, because I did my placements hybrid and remote. And it's just an old mindset of it having to be in person. That's the only way you can get value out of it. So I think it needs to be a mindset shift to continue down that way rather than retracting backwards, like I mentioned. I have seen progress in terms of, one thing I've really noticed that I learned from Windass is, unfortunately, the name of it escaped me right now, but it's where organizations create documents that explain how their layout is. So like where wheelchair access is, what the lights are like, sound, any types of sensory sensitivities. They have a full document about accessibility, and you can look that up ahead of time before you go to the place. So I've seen it at libraries, universities. YDAS has them, and they're becoming more and more common, and YDAS does do trainings on it. And I think that's a really incredible resource that I've been seeing an increase in.
That is fantastic. It's good to know that there's been that much progress. So as you seek hybrid or remote job opportunities, what are the key qualities that you're looking for in an organization or a role?
Yeah, so I guess it's just about the flexibility around disability and seeing the value in my skills and the value in putting in that little bit of extra effort to make those adjustments. Unfortunately, it is a combination as well of being a new grad, and it's usually hard for new grads to sorry, the dog wanted to come in. It's difficult for new grads to get their first job because you're competing significantly with people with experience. And then on top of that, I've got my disability adjustment. So by now, if I didn't have disability, I would have a job by now. But
I
had a job offer retracted because of my adjustment needs. So the hybrid and remote, just hybrid alone is a massive help because doing 2 days in a row, 8 hours is too much for me. I need to break it up. So organizations that are just from the start willing to, like I've emailed organizations that don't advertise it as hybrid, but I ask, is it possible? And oftentimes they'll go, no, it can't be done. It's just what's required for the role, or they'll go, yep, we can discuss that for the right person.
I was saying it's good to know that there is that flexibility within some organizations.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it is increasing, hopefully. Right. And I completely understand there are some roles that it is just essential to be on site, like for outreach roles where you need to go to clients' houses and that's fine. That's not the issue. It's making roles that are completely capable of being hybrid. Mm-hmm. And one argument I hear a lot from employers is, well, you know, we don't know if you're doing the work, if you're doing it from home, but I would argue it becomes obvious very quickly if you're not doing the work, even from home. So I think it's an invalid argument.
Again, if the deliverables are there, you can tell that the person's doing the job. So that's not a real excuse. So what skills and qualities do you believe are essential for making positive difference in the lives of disabled people through social work?
Yeah, I guess improving your own understanding of different disability experiences. Even as a disabled person, during my placement, I realized I knew very little about a lot of disabilities and had to educate myself and be open to being challenged and receiving feedback and being vulnerable in terms of challenging myself. And it can be uncomfortable, but that's how growth happens. And all social workers, I think, really need to be open to that discomfort of being wrong or not knowing everything. And understanding that even when you learn about each disability, it's still an individual experience. Everyone has their unique experience, their unique intersections, and that needs to be taken into account just like anyone else. And speaking to individual clients one-on-one, and asking them what they want rather than just saying, this is what's going to happen. Disabled people usually will have a good idea, they're the expert in their own story. And that should be taken as expertise in itself.
I like that. So what are your long-term goals in the field of social work and disability advocacy, and how do you plan to achieve them?
I guess it's still a bit up in the air at the minute. I would love to do disability advocacy work again. It might be that I have to do another job to get my foot in the door to get towards that, but I would love to do it again. I really enjoyed the work. And it was, I guess, really satisfying, challenging organizations on their practices. And having, even on my placement as a placement student, having clients say, oh my God, I would have given up by now if it wasn't for your help, was just everything. It was really impactful for me. And so, yeah, I guess I would like to go down that route. In terms of personally, I've done a couple articles over the years, but I am trying to do a bit more advocacy online, or just, again, exposure about ableism, and just trying to make people more, I guess, awareness in general is the goal.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to aspiring social workers who wish to specialize in disability advocacy?
Sure. I guess, like I mentioned before, it's, not assuming that disabled people can't make their own decisions. And this is most common for people who maybe don't have the best expressive language, but they can fully understand. That can be intellectual disability, that could be cerebral palsy. It can be a lot of different things where people make assumptions. And I think people need to be very aware and careful to check themselves on that. And I just really, that supported decision making is so beneficial, because it leads to independence, it leads to self-advocacy, and that self-advocacy leads to future changes in general. So there are people who've learned to advocate for themselves that go on to be full-on advocates. So it's, I think that's the most important thing I can say, is that fostering independence.
Last question. Based on all of your experiences, if there was a young disabled person who's listening to this podcast right now, is experiencing pain, is experiencing discomfort, or not sure whether they're being reasonable or not, what advice would you give? Like you said, a lot of times you're not believed. People don't take you seriously. Give us 3 nuggets of wisdom in terms of what one can do.
I would say, well, for one, if you have a doctor that is, or a specialist that is being dismissive, go to a new doctor. If it's possible, go to a new specialist. Keep going until you find one that is good. There are good ones out there. There are really crappy ones out there. Don't just sit with the same person thinking, well, you know, this is it. It is a pain having to do that and look for new specialists, new doctors, but it is worth it in the end. It happened to my mother 25 years ago, where she had one doctor who didn't believe her, and she ended up having to have emergency surgery because it got pushed back so far. And it wasn't until a specialist went, oh my God, you need surgery. This is ridiculous. So yeah, keep pushing, because just because someone's dismissive doesn't mean it's not true, that what you're experiencing is valid. And same with schools, same with employment. It is exhausting. It is difficult advocating for yourself. But you know, schools need to do better. And if you're finding it too exhausting, reach out to advocates. There are a lot of advocate agencies around. Unfortunately, there isn't enough for youth. I'm hoping that will improve. But advocates are there to help. There's also legal organizations that give free legal advice that I've used myself, and they're all really helpful.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming online and sharing your story with us today. You've brought a lot of insights, things that I wasn't aware of with regards to the challenges in this field. And good luck with the job search. Hopefully this podcast might be something that somebody picks up on and hears, and a job might manifest for you. But thank you so much, Caitlin. Absolutely wonderful to meet you. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. The Diversity Connector is bringing us stories from all aspects of diversity. Diversity is not just about gender. It's not just about race. It's a whole range of aspects that make us human. So tune in again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now. Thanks again, Caitlin. Thank you for tuning into the Her Story Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the Her Story Circle podcast for more updates. And join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep